So today, the day before Tisha B'av is going to start, we're having a class on Tisha B'av. Now, Tisha B'av actually just means the 9th of the month of Av, the 5th month of the year. It's called the Fast of the 5th, and it's a day of national mourning for the Jewish people. And we are mourning for the destruction of the first and the second temples. It actually coincides with the day that the spies came back with the bad report about Israel, and the Jewish people cried. And the sages say, because we cried needlessly, because we were afraid of the inhabitants of the land, when God had promised us everything was going to be fine, cried needlessly, this will be a day of tears in the future. That's the Midrash. Something poetic about it. So we believe in cycles of time. When we get to Passover, in the air at that time of year is freedom. And if you want to work on what it means to be free, really free, Passover is the best time to do it. You can do that any time of the year. This is a different season. This is a season of judgment and justice. And so it's a time to reflect on that. It's a time to reflect on the fact that we're here by the mercy of the Almighty. He keeps us alive every breath, and He gave us a purpose and a reason. And it's a good time for us to reflect on that and do tshuva on the fact that the individual or on the national level, are we fulfilling our purpose? So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive, and even the ones of you here that are a little bit more expert, like Richard, my friend Richard there, I'm sure you've heard many times, Richard, what the reasons are that the sages give us why the first and the second temples were destroyed. We're going to go through them. We're going to come up with something different today, a little bit different. So even if you're very familiar with the 9th of the month of Av and why the temples were destroyed and what we're trying to accomplish this day, because in the Jewish calendar, it's not just commemoration. It's not just being nostalgic, whether it's Passover or Sukkot. We don't believe in nostalgia. What we believe in is we believe in furthering the journey, our progression through history, our destiny in history. And the way we do that, we sort of cycle through time and come back to similar moments in time, and we relive them, because as we said the last time with miracles, who was here for the class on miracles? We said a miracle was what? A nes. It's a banner. It's to get your attention. Wake up. So we have these cycles in time when we have the Passover miracles, or we have the Sukkot miracles, the miracles of being able to survive in the desert. When we come back to that time, we're reliving it. We're not just being nostalgic. This is an opportunity for us to relive it. And it says in the Talmud that any generation in which the temple is not rebuilt, what that means is we never learned the lesson. We didn't learn the lesson, and we didn't change and accomplish what we're supposed to accomplish through experiencing this. It's an opportunity to wake up and do teshuvah. We talked a little bit about that in sin and repentance, to change something, change our direction. If you change the direction, then the problem will go away, because it's not a problem. It's a message. Remember what we said that? When your parents send you to the room, or when you get grounded, when you learn the lesson and you say, I learned my lesson, I'm not going to do that ever again. I understand how it's not getting me to where I want to get to. Then you say, okay, come on out of your room. So the 1900 and what did we say? 50 years since the temple was destroyed, we've been sent into exile. Just like Adam and Eve were sent into exile. We had the opportunity to come back home. All right, so we're going to take a look on our sources, and we're going to do a deep dive and try to focus what's the real message, what's the underlying problem that we need to fix as a people and as the world. And it's very interesting because Tisha B'av amongst the Jewish people is probably the least known. If anybody here have like Jewish friends you might work with, Jewish people in the office, neighbors, if they're not observant, if they're not Orthodox, and you ask them, hey, it's Tisha B'av tomorrow. My guess is if they're not seriously connected with their Judaism, they're going to say, Tisha, what? What? They're not going to know. You know why they don't know what it is? Because even if they went to parochial school, even they went to afternoon Sunday day school, when does this holiday fall? In the middle of the summer, July and August, when school's out. So you never got taught it. So unless they went to a Jewish summer camp, maybe they might have commemorated it somehow, some way. But it's one of the least known, and I would claim it's probably one of the most important, if not the most important day on the Jewish calendar. Because if what we're longing for is redemption, if what we're longing for is Mashiach, if what we're longing for is bringing back the Jewish people to the land, which we're in the process of seeing happen before our eyes, if that's what we want, then this is the day to learn the lesson to help make that happen. This is the main day. If we get this one, if we learn what happened and why it happened, why it was taken away, why we were sent into exile, and we do the appropriate change, what's going to happen? It'll turn everything around. And who's that good for? It's good for the Jewish people, but who else is it good for? It's good for the world, right? Let's take a look at our source sheet. I claim that Tisha B'av is probably, it should be a very important day for the whole world. Why? Here we have Isaiah. We're going to see Isaiah in a second, but here's Isaiah chapter 56. He's talking about the final redemption when we come back. What does he say? I will bring them all back to my holy mountain, V'simachtim, and I'll take joy with them, B'veit Tfilati, in my house of prayer. Olotechem v'zivchechem, the ratzon al mizbechi, right? Their offerings and their sacrifices. We talked about a korban, what it means to help bring yourself closer to the Almighty. They'll be there, bebeiti, ki beiti beit tefillah yikaret lekol ha'amim. My house, this temple up above there, is called a house of prayer for all the nations. I see that the ICEJ, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, they have a festival called the Feast every year. Thousands and thousands of people come because the prophets say at the end of days, not only will the Jewish people be celebrating, but the nations of the world will be coming at the end during Sukkot, where we offer up sacrifices for all the nations. There's 70 sacrifices that we bring, one for each of the nations. The nations all participate. It's a way to unite the whole world under the kingship of the Almighty, and it's a way for everybody to connect. It's a Beit Tefillah, it's a house of prayer for everybody. The fact that we don't have it, we're losing out as the Jewish people. The fact that the nations don't have it, the nations are losing out. So this should be the most famous of all of the days in the Jewish calendar for the world. So on the Shabbat, this past Shabbat, we have a reading. I was just talking with one of our participants. I don't know if she's here yet, if June is here, but we were talking about the Haftorah. In the synagogue, every week, we read one of the Torah portions. We cycle through the Torah the whole year in 1 year, and we divide it up into the different portions, and each week is a different portion, so that on the last day of Sukkot, Simchat Torah, on Shmini Atzeret, the day after the end of Sukkot, we complete the Torah and we start up a new cycle. There was a time during the period of the Hanukkah story when we were forbidden to read aloud from the Torah. And what the sages said, since we weren't allowed to read from the Torah, they instituted a selection from one of the books of the prophets that had some kind of a hint or a connection with that week's Torah portion that should have been read. That's the Haftorah. So therefore, not all of the books of the prophets are read in synagogue. It became a custom. And even once we were allowed to read the Torah in public again, we kept that custom. So it's called the Haftorah. So either it's a reflection or connecting to the actual Torah portion that's being read that week, or the sages said, let's do something connected to whatever holiday or special day is occurring or about to occur. So this past Shabbat, we have a custom to always read from the first chapter of Isaiah. It's called Chazon Yeshayahu. the vision of Isaiah, the prophecy of Isaiah, and every Orthodox community in the world, all this past Shabbat, read this portion from Isaiah it's for the first chapter, in order to get ready for Tisha B'av. So here it is, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amotz, Isaiah the son of Amotz. And he was prophesying about Yehuda and Yerushalayim, the destruction. Now, it's going to be interesting that what he's going to not focus on, he's not going to focus on the actual destruction of the temples here in his prophecy. So he says, Shimu shamayim v'azinu eretz. Listen, heavens, and pay attention, the earth. So I want you to focus on these green words that I've highlighted, shamayim v'aretz. Ki Hashem diber banim gidalti romamtihem bashubi. God said, I had children, the children of Israel, and I raised them up, I elevated them, and they acted in a criminal way against me. They rebelled against me. Yado shor konehu, an ox knows his owner is. But Israel, Yisrael lo yada ami, v'lo hitbonan. He says, the Jewish people, Israel, doesn't know who I am. And they're not thinking about it. They're not thinking about me. Banim mashchitim, children that are destroying, mashchitim, depraved, destroying. We're going to see later on what this actual word lahashchit means, and it's going to come up over and over. So depraved children, azvu et Hashem, they abandoned me. Niatzu et kodesh Israel, right? They spurned the holy of Israel, and they turned this back on him. Artzachem shemama, and that the land is desolate, talking about the destruction that's sitting behind me in the background. Arechem strufot eish, right? You can actually see the remnants of the burnings of the temple that the Romans did at that time. Shimud davar Hashem, lama li rav zivchehem. And God says, it's interesting, he's talking about now, before the destruction, what do I need all of your sacrifices for? Ki tavo le'ra'ot panai, says, you're coming to see me. This is before the temple is destroyed. He says, what do I need your sacrifices for? Why are you coming to me? Who asked you to come and trample in the courtyard, the chatzer up above on the Temple Mount? Stop bringing your incense. Stop bringing it. It's a to'eva. A to'eva is an abomination. Abomination is when something is used for the exact opposite for what it was meant to be used for. It's a to'eva. Chodesh v'shabbat krot mikra lo uchal aven v'atzara. The new moon and the Sabbath. That means the Jewish people were keeping the new moon. They were being very careful about declaring the new moon. And why did we declare the new moon? In order to keep the holidays. We're observing all the holidays. We're bringing sacrifices, and God is angry, right? He doesn't want our holidays. Ki tarbut tefillah eineni shomea. You're davening, you're praying, you're saying all these words and prayers. I'm not listening. Yedechem damim maleu. Your hands are stained with blood. Rachatzu, and now he says, now listen, as bad as it is, Rachatzu v'hizaku. Get washed, purify yourselves. You can get rid of the evil that's on you. That you're doing in front of me. Chidlu harea. Get rid of the bad. Limdu heitev v'dirshu mishpat. Learn well and seek out justice. Ashru chamotz shiftu yatom. Help judge the rights of the orphan. Riv'u almana. Argue on behalf of the widow. Yomar Hashem, imiu chatechem kashanim kashaleg yalbinu. He says, don't worry about it. If you learn to do good and you seek justice and you take care of the orphan and the widow, then your sins, your reddened sins will turn to crimson white. Everything will be fine. So what's interesting about that is that he's talking about the time before the temple's destroyed. And what he's saying is that, hey, even though you're keeping all the holidays, you're bringing sacrifices, you're praying, you're going through all of these motions, there's something dreadfully wrong going on here. There's something dreadfully going wrong here, so much so that he's calling it an abomination. Again, an abomination is when you use something for the exact antithesis for what it was meant to be used. You get a beautiful bottle of wine, right? A beautiful bottle of wine, and you take it and you wash your windows with it. It's an abomination. It's a toiva. Something beautiful that was used to make Kiddush Friday night at your Shabbos table, at your Shabbat table. It's an abomination. It's disgusting, right? So he's saying whatever you're doing it, you're not using it for what you're meant to be using it for. There's something that's underlying wrong going on. This is before the temple is destroyed. And that's what Yeshayahu is talking about. This is what he's talking about before Tisha B'av. So what he's telling us is whatever you're doing it, the way you're doing it is turning your back on me. And what's the implication? If you do it the right way, you're not turning your back on me, and therefore everything will be fine. Because it's not like he didn't command us to keep the new month. It's not like he didn't command us to keep the holidays. Not like he didn't say to bring the offerings, the sacrifices. Not like he wasn't telling us to do all of these things. Obviously, we're doing it in the wrong way. So what is that? Right? I see Leah's nodding with me. What is the underlying issue? So that's what we're going to hunt for today. That's what we're going to seek out and see if we can find it in the verses. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you the classic answer of why the sages say the temples were destroyed. This is in the Talmud in Yoma, which is the portion of the Talmud dealing with Yom Kippur. Mikdash Rishon mipnei macharav. Why was the first temple destroyed? They ask. Mipnei gimel dvarim, because of three things. Shayubo, that were during that time of the first temple. Avodah zarah, they were doing idol worship. V'gilui arayot, sexual immorality. Meaning having relations with other people's wives. V'shfichut damim, and the spilling of blood, meaning murder. Those we were saying the last time were the three cardinal transgressions that are, you have to be willing to die rather than somebody saying, say, do this or I'll kill you. You have to be willing to die rather than do them. Aval mikdash sheni, however, the second temple, shayu oskim b'torah u'b'mitzvot, during the second temple, they were doing all of the Torah mitzvahs. They weren't murdering people. They weren't sexual immorality. They weren't doing all these horrible things. They were keeping all the mitzvot during the second temple. They were learning Torah, mitzvot, and doing commandments. Gemilut chasadim, they were doing acts of kindness. Mipnei macharav, why was the second temple destroyed? Mipnei shahayta bo sinat chinam, because there was sinat chinam, free hatred, meaningless hatred, meaning I'm hating you because your mistakes are different than my mistakes. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg taught me that. You make your mistakes. You're not putting on. You're not keeping Shabbat, so I hate you for not keeping Shabbat. I might say, use coarse language. That's my problem. I don't consider that such a big problem, but you do. So we hate each other for our mistakes that are different. Stupidity. There's no real reason for us to hate each other for that. So what's interesting about that, if we have spiritual physics, in Judaism we believe in spiritual physics. There's this concept of midah keneged midah, measure for measure, meanings. In order to communicate, if you're communicating with your child or a little kid, you have to communicate in a way that's related to what it is that they're doing if you want them to get the message. If the 2-year-old or 1.5-year-old is about to stick their finger in an electric socket, you don't hit them in the tush, in the behind. You hit their finger so that they'll get it, that their finger is doing something wrong. Midah keneged midah, measure for measure, that's what that means. So if there's a consequence, right, we believe in spiritual physics, cause and effect. That's Elohim, that's Teva, that's nature. God speaks to us through nature, we said last time. So therefore, if there's a exact same effect, what does that mean? It had to be the exact same stimulus, cause. Does that make sense? See that? If there's the same effect, there must be the same stimulus. So if we go back and we take a look, we'll see the sages said this. We could figure that out on our own, didn't need them to tell us. But he says, if it's true that there was wanted hatred during the second temple and the three cardinal sins of murder and sexual immorality and idol worship in the first, it comes to teach you that they're the same, that they're the same thing, they're equivalent. Somehow they have to be coming from the same place. Those three things. That's one of the things that's the main thing we're going to try to figure out. How is murder and idolatry and sexual immorality the same as hating your fellow for no reason? Okay. Now, if we go into our sources, go into the Talmud, and here this is a commentary on Eicha. Eicha is the Book of Lamentations. We're going to be reading the Book of Lamentations in a synagogue on Tisha B'av from Yirmiyahu. Jeremiah wrote it, and he's talking about appreciating the loss that we have in losing the temple and the destruction. Again, to wake us up to do teshuvah, to change our ways. The entire books of the prophets, the only reason why the books of the prophets are canonized, the only reason they're there, the reason why they're there is they don't teach us any new mitzvah. The 5 books of Moses is a summary told in story form of the 613 commandments. We say Torah is instructions for living. So the 613 commandments are referenced in the 5 books of Moses. The details are in the oral Torah, like we learned from Rabbi Khan. That's all you need. I don't need anything. The books of the prophets, there's no new commandment. There's no new commandment in the books of the prophets. So what do we need them for? And why are not every prophet included? There's a lot of apocryphal works. There's, at the time of the first temple, this is the second temple, at the time of the first temple, there were millions of prophets. People went to prophecy school, right? We talked about how you achieve prophecy. You get your ego out of the way. You work on your knowledge so you can start thinking the way God thinks about the world and what God's idea is for the world, right? And it's an emergent property of removing your ego and seeing the world the way God sees it. That's prophecy. There were millions. People actually said, this is an important thing. I want to become a prophet. I want to study with a master prophet. We don't record all of those. Why? People were having prophecy all the time. So what the sages did when they canonized what we call the Old Testament, and they took the 5 books of Moses and added in the prophets and the writings, they said, what the point of prophecy is tochacha, rebuke. It's like the Nes, right? If we're not having a miracle, I can go to the prophets, and especially on a time like Tisha B'av, when I'm reading the book of Lamentations, or I want to read Chazon Yeshayahu, I want to read the books of Isaiah at the beginning, I can read Isaiah, and Isaiah is going to give me rebuke. He's going to wake me up and show me the seriousness of the situation, the potential consequences, and therefore all of the books of the prophets are there for rebuke. That's what they're there for. Learn a lesson and change your ways. That's what they're there for. So now, Eicha, let's go back to Eicha, the book of Lamentations from Yirmiyahu, to wake us up to change. So we'll get rid of the problem that caused the destruction of the temples, and we won't lose another temple. So he says, Eicha Yashva. That's how the book of Lamentations begins. Oh, how the city dwells alone. So they asked Ben Azai, and they said, why? Give us a little word. Give us a Devar Torah. Tell us something about Lamentations. We want to learn. So he said to them, Lo Galu Yisrael, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel, weren't dispersed and sent into exile. Ad shekafru b'chido shel olam. They became heretics. They denied the existence of God. They also stopped Mila, Shenitna le'esrim dorot. There was 20 generations until they actually stopped it. And they stopped it. Be'aseret hadibrot. Because they weren't paying attention to the 10 commandments, and the 5 books of Moses. So you take the 5 books of Moses as 5, and you take the 10 commandments as 10, and you take 20 generations, and you add in 1, it all adds up to 36. And if you look at the word echa, it adds up to 20, 30. The letter aleph is 1, and this is 5. That's 36. So actually, echa, the lamentation, the destruction, is related to back to these 36 things down here. What he's saying is there's a lot of things that add up to the same thing. It adds up to the same thing. There's one underlying cause. All right. So now, was the destruction of the temple? I saw this year. The destruction of the temple, we're going to see that it was hinted at in the book of Genesis at the very beginning. We're going to see again also that it's hinted at in the story of Noah. We're going to take a look and see how there's hints to it in those 2 portions. And what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to learn some lessons from the verses in Genesis and the verses in Noah to help us with this underlying problem. What's really the problem? Here you go. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning of God's creating the universe, God created the heavens and the earth. Remember we said shamayim va'aretz. Those are the 2 words we saw in Chazon Yeshayahu, right? Listen to heavens, pay attention to earth. V'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. And the earth was tohu vavohu, strange words. Tohu means formless, void. Vohu is a different kind of void, formless and void. That's how it's translated. We could spend a day going through this verse. V'choshech al pnei tehom, and darkness upon the depths. The ruach Elohim, and the ruach, the spirit of Elohim, of God, merachefet is hovering al pnei hamayim. It's hovering over the water. All right. You could spend days and days learning that verse, those verses. Here's the Balaturim. The Balaturim, Yosef Karo, he wrote this commentary for his son-in-law, who was getting married to his daughter. And he just went through the entire book, the 5 books of Moses, and he went through and he found hints in the words of each of the words in the written Torah to show you how they are reflecting the understandings that are recorded in the oral Torah. How the written in the Torah and the oral Torah are all connected. He showed you word for word. So here he says, the Balaturim, Tov v'ho, that formless and void term. It occurs twice in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. The first time here, and the second time in Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. Ra'iti et haaretz v'hinei tov v'vohu. He said when the destruction came and he looked out on the land, in his vision, he saw it was formless and void. It was like it was destroyed back to the beginning of creation, where it was nothing. He's giving you a lesson there when he's saying that, isn't he? He's saying that, yeah, what we did, here we're talking about the purpose of creation. The world is being created, and by what we did and losing the temple, we negated the whole purpose of creation. Okay, so what is this teaching us? That this tov v'vo v'choshech al pnei adama melamed shetzafah kadosh baruch hu, God expected at the time of creation the destruction of the temple. Whoa. Shenerachrav b'shnat taf he vav. He expected the destruction of the temple. The first temple was destroyed in the year 400. The letter taf is 400, he is 5, vav is 6, 411. In the year 411, it stood for 410 years, and in the 411th year, the first temple was destroyed. The Charkach, Ubayit Sheni, in the second temple, it stood for 420 years. Whoa. Taf is 400. A yud is 10. A hey is 5. Another hey is 5. That adds up to 420. The word haita, and it was, the aretz was, the land was, is a hint about the second temple being destroyed. So the word tohu, let's go back up here. The word tohu is a hint at the destruction of the first temple. This word haita is a hint of the destruction of the second temple. And what happens after this? You have choshech. Choshech, what is darkness? Afterwards, choshech, that's a hint for exile. Exile, in our tradition, we say is darkness, and redemption is light. And we're going to see the reason why the redemption comes through light is when we bring Torah, which is compared to light, back to our nation, then we achieve redemption and we lose the darkness of the exile. And what is Ruach Elohim Merachefet? And the Spirit of Hashem is hovering over the waters. If you take a look and add up, you know how we added up 420 for this word and 410 for the other? If you add up the numbers, add this all up, 6 and 200 and 6, and that's 212, and another 8 is 220, and you go through, add it all up, it adds up to the same value as Zohi Rucho Shel Melech HaMashiach. That is the spirit of the Messiah King, right? So Ruach Elohim Merachefet is the same thing as saying the spirit of the King, Messiah King. So they're saying we're going to have the destruction of the temples and we're going to go into exile, but God will stay with us in exile, and ultimately the spirit of the Mashiach will bring us back to the land and rebuild the temples. Okay. Now, I want to share with you something else from our oral tradition. Rashi is our main go-to commentary from the 10th century. And he wrote the simple, plain meaning of the words in the text while we're reading it, if we want to understand it. So those of you who want to read the Torah and get an understanding of what the plain meaning of the Hebrew words means, you can get a 5-volume set with Torah and Rashi and have a running commentary. I can put a link in the notes. Actually, I'll do that for you if you're interested in getting that. But here you'll see what he says about the very first verse. He says, Bereshit, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, says Rabbi Yitzchak, who was Rashi's father, Rav Shlomo Yitzchaki. His name was Shlomo, the son of Yitzchak. Lo hayat tzarich latchil et Torah ele me'achodesh hazeh lechem, she mitzvah rishona shenitztavu ba Yisrael. Ma tam patach bereshit. So we've said this before. We said that many times already. You guys are getting used to this. The Torah means instructions for living, meaning the instructions for the Jewish people. It's a user's guide for the nation of Israel of how to live our society. It's our constitution. The oral law is the legal code. So if that's true, it's all about the mitzvot, then the Torah should have started with, when we're leaving Egypt and we're becoming a nation, the first commandment we got as a nation is, Achodesh hazeh lachem. This month should be the first of the months for you, right? And then we brought the Korban Pesach. 15 days later is going to be Passover. So the first commandment to us as a nation begins in the book of Exodus. If that's true, that's all we need. We just need a recording of the 613 commandments in the Torah. So why are you starting with this whole big book that begins with the creation of the universe? What's that got to do with the user's guide for the Jewish people? Good question. Rashi asks that question. So let's see what he comes up with an answer. Some of you know the answer. Some of you are going to be shocked by the answer. So in the book of Psalms, it says, the power, his power he displayed to his nation, so that he could give them an inheritance from the nations, meaning the land from the nations. Explains Rashi, you might have heard this in the news lately. that if the nations of the world, if the United Nations should come along and say, Listimatem, you are thieves, you are colonialists, you came from Europe, Shekavashtem Artzot Shiva Goyim, that you conquered the lands of the 7 nations. This is not a new claim the nations of the world have, right? The original 7 Canaanite nations, when Joshua came in, and we took the land according to the instructions of the Almighty, and we did it with the Almighty's help. How are we going to have these former slaves that are living in the desert going to come and conquer stable nations on their home territory? It was only through miracles. So they come along and say, oh, they're going to say, oh, you stole it from the 7 nations. Forget about it. You stole it from the modern day Palestinian Arabs, right? So what's our answer as the Jewish people? Kol haaretz shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All the land in the world. God created the universe, and everything belongs to Him. Hu bara'ah, He created it. V'natna la'asher yashar b'einav, and He gave it to the 7 nations. That's who He wanted to give it to at the time. Birtzono natana lahem. It was His will to give it to them at that time. Ubirtzono, and it was His will at the time of Joshua to take it away from them and give it to the nation of Israel. Wow. Wow. It's kind of weird, right? Rashi's saying the whole point of telling the whole Genesis story about God created the universe was so that when the UN comes along and says Zionism is racism and you're colonialists and you don't deserve the land and you shouldn't annex this land because it doesn't belong to you because you stole it during the 48 war, from the 67 war, we stole it, right? When they started the war against us, we stole it. Right? It doesn't belong to you. Listimatem, you're thieves. That's what they're calling us, right? What's our answer? You know what our ambassador in the UN should say? Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. It'd be nice to see if the Israeli ambassador did that, right? God created the heavens and the earth. And He gave the land to whoever He wanted to give it to. And He took it away from the 7 nations, and He gave it to the children of Israel. 3,330, no, less. 3 years less 40 years. And He gave it to us then. And then, you know what? We went into exile. And you know what? He brought us back out of exile, brought us back to our homeland through signs and wonders and miracles. And in 1967, He created another miracle. And even though the Jordanians, He wanted the Jordanians to have it for 19 years, He took it from them and gave it to us in a miracle. What are you arguing with us? Go argue with God. It says it in the Torah. 1.5 billion of you believe in the Old Testament. Forget about the 1/4, the 1%, the 12 million Jews. 1.5 billion Christians believe in this book. 1.5 billion Muslims believe in this book. Okay, so I have a problem with the Chinese. Maybe they'll say, okay, explain to me why I should accept this book as being authoritative. We've got 3 billion people believe it. Why aren't we using that as the argument? Rashi's telling us the whole point, the reason it was written this way is to say it. Okay. So now let's take a look at the story of Noah. What happens? Here's that word again, v'tishachet. V'tishachet. So the world became corrupt. The land became corrupt before God. V'timileh haaretz chamas. And the land was full with Hamas. Hamas doesn't mean our enemies in Gaza, although it's kind of interesting it's connected here. Hamas means thievery, taking something that doesn't belong from you, that doesn't belong to you from somebody else. So the tishachet we're going to see is related to immorality and idol worship. V'yar Elohim et haaretz, and God saw the land. V'hinei nishchata. Here's that word again. It became corrupt again. Ki hishchit kol basar et darko al haaretz. Because all flesh, not even humanity, even the animals, have perverted their ways on the land. V'yomer Elohim leNoach. God says to Noah through prophecy, Ketz kol basar ba lefanai. The end of all flesh, meaning human beings and the animal kingdom, has come before me. Ki mal'ah ha'aretz chamas, because the land is full with chamas, thievery, mipnehem, v'hineni mashchitam et ha'aretz, and I'm going to destroy. So look, remember we talked about mida, kineda, nida? There's hashchata, there's that word, and there's destruction here. It's a destructive, corruptive force, sexual immorality and idol worship, and God's going to destroy the world. Mida, keneged mida, measure for measure, right? Using the same word there. You wouldn't see that in the English, right? Here in English, we have corrupt, we have destroy. What's that got to do with that? It's the same word, people. Okay, let's go back to our friend Rashi to understand what's this, the tisha mean. Tisha, when you see that word, corrupt, it means ereva avodah zorah. It means sexual immorality and idolatry, right? And he brings down a supporting verse in Deuteronomy. And later on, we're going to see in this next verse, hishchit kol basar, the whole, what does it mean? Ki hishchit kol basar. V'timaleh haaretz chamas is gezel, is thievery. Actually, thievery means taking something that's so small that you can't be taken to court over it. Right? They were smart about their thievery. Right? What did they do? They'd go into the grocery store and take like half a grape from this big pile of grapes. You can't even buy a half a grape, right? Everybody, so you can't get taken to court for it. But if everybody takes half a grape, you can't be taken to court for it. What happens? The grocer ends up losing all his grapes. He's lost everything because everybody being smart about their thievery. It's not really thievery. I'm not really stealing. He wants me to try it because then if I like it, I'm going to buy it. So I don't even have to ask him, right? I'll just take it, right? That's what the chamas was. That's what the gezel was at the time. So now, and hishchit kol basar, let's take a look at that. I want to show you because if I don't show you, you might not believe me. You believe me, you like me. Ki hishchit kol basar, afilu behema chaya va'of nizkakim l'she'einam minam. They had sexual relations with species that weren't from their own species. That's how corrupt the world had become. Now, animals don't have free will. So how are they doing something that goes against their natural instincts? Because we believe in spiritual ecology. What humanity was doing in terms of their behavior of taking other people's wives and having relations with them when they shouldn't have, it started infecting everything. And even the animals became infected in having relations with species that weren't their species, that they shouldn't be having relations with. All right. So now let's take a look here. It's going to be very interesting. Kates kol basar. It says kol makom she'ata motze znun v'avodah zorah. Every time that we see that there's sexual immorality and idol worship, what ends up coming to the world is good people and bad people get swept up into the destructive response, right? It's a horrible thing that happens. And when it says, Ki malah ha'aretz chamas, right? God said, the end of all flesh has come to me because the world was filled with chamas, and now I'm going to destroy the world. Whoa, God didn't say anything about this hashchata business, about this idol worship, and he's just mentioning the chamas. And what does Rashi say? That's important distinction. Lo nechtam gzar dinam ela al hagezel. God was tolerating the other horrible behavior. What he couldn't tolerate was people stealing and taking advantage of other people. That sealed the deal. The other is horrible. The other goes against the whole purpose of creation also. But once they started stealing from each other and not respecting each other's property, that sealed the deal. And the whole world had to be destroyed because of that. It was the stealing, not the sexual immorality. So now we see here the essential problem was the thievery, taking what doesn't belong to you. So both in the creation of the world and the creation of Israel, of the Jewish people, the same thing, right? Let's look at our old friend, the Kli Yakar. Remember the Kli Yakar? From the 1500s. So he's discussing what Rashi said in the 10th century. He says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rashi said, Lo hayat tzarich latchil et Torah. He said, we didn't need to start the Torah except for the first. This is the first of the months for you, right? And the reason why he said it is because so the nations of the world, when they say we're thieves, we can have an answer for them, right? So our friend the Kli Yakar says, wait a second. You're trying to tell me this is the instruction man of the Jewish people. And in the off chance that some kind, thousands of years in the future, somebody might say, you stole the land, that's the reason we have to turn around the whole order of the Torah and add all this extra book and begin with the story of creation. You're not going to have a different answer. It seems a little bit, it's that important? Asked the Kli Yakar. So what's the answer going to be? It's that important. Because this idea of just taking that little thing that doesn't belong to you, this little non-crime, it brings heresy. Gorem kfira. When it says heresy, it means denying the existence of God. Ki amru, and the whole point of existence is to have a relationship with God and acknowledge, to choose to believe that there's a God. So here we're saying, by taking something that's not yours, even if it's the smallest of things, that's the beginning of denying the existence of God. Because they'll say there's no judge and there's no judgment. And whoever is the strongest, whoever can get away with whatever they can get away with, hey, he's going to win. Because they'll say, because if there were a manhig, somebody that's in charge, a supervisor, you know, who knows what's coming and going, who's watching, who's supervising. If there is a God, why, when you came and you took by force the land of the seven nations, why didn't he stop you? Right? It was thievery. Looking at it from their point of view, the seven nations of the world, they were like doing heavy duty idol worship in the land. They were doing all kinds of sexual immorality. But for them, that was their culture. They're not doing anything wrong. You see what I'm saying? If your culture says it's okay to do it, if your culture says it's okay to take a grape when you go into the supermarket and everybody does it, there's nothing wrong with it. Especially if you don't get arrested and taken to court. So in the eyes of the seven nations, they weren't doing anything wrong. Everything's fine. You come along from out of nowhere, from out of the desert, this horde of people, and you come wantonly starting to killing and pillaging and right? What? No God. There's no God in the world. Where was God when the Jews came and stole the land from us? No God in the world, no justice in the world. It's survival of the fittest. That's what it's all about. See that? The perception of being able to get away, taking something and not get caught and not, right? That's the beginning of denying the existence of God. Maybe he created the world, started everything going, but he's letting it run and he's hands off. Right? It's big. I can't, you know what going on in America is everything about everything that we're learning right now, right? Defund the police, no consequences, right? What's up with that? Very weird. Okay. So, yeah, that's the beginning of the kafira. That's the beginning of the denying the existence of God. It's not just a little thing. And so for that reason, the actual seal of the deal to cause the flood to come to wipe out all flesh didn't happen until it was full of gezel. Everybody was stealing everything from everybody else. No property rights. Kamoshe Amar, Gozel Avivimo, somebody who steals from his parents. It's like parents. They go into their mother's wallet, take out some money. I didn't do anything wrong. No. In the end, he becomes a friend of the person who is mashchit. It leads ultimately to people thinking the other guy's wife is open season, that idol worship is fine. God's not going to do anything if I start serving these idols. I can get away with anything. You become the friend. Once you see you get away with a little. And again, you listen to those stories about, Rudy Giuliani, how he cleaned up New York. How did he clean up New York? He said it starts with the turnstile jumpers. It's a dime, whatever it was in those days when he was mayor, 10 cents. They're jumping the turnstile in the subway. Big deal. He put portable police stations in there and stopped them and arrested them as soon as they jumped over the turnstile. You know what ended up happening? The murder rate went down. The rape rate went down. New York became a clean city. Why? Because if people see that they can get away with this little thing and nobody's watching and nobody cares, they become chaverim, they become a friend with idol worshipers, rapists, and murderers. It leads ultimately to that. We got a smart Torah, right, people? I love the Torah. See, it wasn't about the essence of the gezel. It wasn't about the 10 cents of the turnstile. It's the evil that gets schlepped along behind with it. The guy who steals that little bit that skips the turnstile for 10 cents, he doesn't look himself as being guilty for anything because he says there's no crime and there's no judgment. There's no God. And therefore he becomes friend of the gangs that are rolling. It's the kids that's an innocent turnstile jumper. Next thing you know, he's hanging around with the gangs that are shooting 15, 20, 50 people a weekend in Chicago. They denied the existence of God. And that's what started with Hamas and Gezel, with stealing that little bit. So since preventing Gezel, right, preventing this thing of stealing is the shoresh, it's the root. So that's why it was stuck at the very beginning of Bereshit. This principle of the idea of taking something that's not yours, and the only right that you have to something is if you do it according to the rules that God gives you, that is the number one principle that's going to cause all of humanity to develop and build a God-fearing, God-loving universe. Okay, so now we got a few minutes to finish up. We're going to jump ahead to the 1700s. One of my teachers, the Gaon of Vilna. First in the Talmud from 2,000 years ago, 1,600 years ago, Rava said, Jerusalem was destroyed only because there were no more trustworthy people there. Whoa. So what does that mean? Lo charva Yerushalayim ela bishvil shepasku mimena anshe amana. When he says anshe amana, anashim, men, meaning the leaders, amana, you know that word, emuna, amen. Remember we talked about amen, emuna, emet. Emet is truth. Amen is I'm acknowledging the trustworthiness of what you're saying, ne'amanut. Anshe amana are leaders who you can trust. The Sanhedrin, the High Court, the judges, the police who are acting on behalf of the Sanhedrin, all of these leaders who have power and authority need to be anshe amana. Amana, meaning their actions and their words, what they're doing, have to testify that God is the creator, the sustainer, and the supervisor, and there's no power in the world other than God, and that they are making themselves subservient to God's principles, God's law. That's what Anshe Amanah. That is the leadership that you need to run your society. Once that ceased in Jerusalem, right? Herod comes along, an illegitimate convert who's put in as a puppet. They take out the Pharisees, they put in the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees, and all of a sudden the corruption starts happening and the bribery. No reason people want to get upset with that. Once that happened, that was the beginning of the destruction. Because once you see that there's really no trustworthy, there's no rules, and that the word for a judge or Elohim, same word that we use for God as Elohim, right? They're God's representatives in the world. As soon as you see that you can get away with stuff by paying off a bribe, then you say, there's no God. It's all about whoever can figure out the system better. Once that happens, that seals the deal. That seals the deal for the destruction. All right, let's go back to our sources because we got to finish up. A few minutes left. Now we're coming to the Gaon of Vilna. The Gaon of Vilna was in the 1700s. In 1781, he saw that this was the beginning of the final redemption, and he sent 70 of his students from Vilna in Poland. President Rivlin is one of the direct descendants of those 70 families, Ruby Rivlin. And when he sent them, he said, listen, we are now going to start build the land to lead up to the coming of the Mashiach. And he sent them in 1781. And he gave them instructions to understand what to do and how to do it and where to put your priorities. Okay, you got to start planting the fields to bring forth the fruits. And one of the things that they said is going to hold back the coming of the Mashiach. And one of the main principles here he says is Anshe Amanah. This is one of the principal things that we have to establish. Right? Everything that we're doing to try to rebuild the land and bring the Jewish people back to the land, it's all going to be for naught unless we can establish Anshe Amanah, the leadership that is trustworthy, that's acting according to the word of God. Al Pi Chazal, according to the Gemara in Shabbat, which we just saw, that the city wasn't destroyed except that Anshe Amanah were ceased to exist. All of this pioneering that we're doing, the ingathering of the exiles that began in the 18th century of the modern Aliyah and the modern Zionist movement that happened in the 19th century afterwards, right? Modern Zionism started with the religious movement coming from the Gaon of Vilna, out of Poland, not with Herzl. These guys came first. But everything that they're going to be for naught unless you have Anshe Amanah. The other thing that's so important when you're building your society, midot shavot, equal measures. Yishuv Artseinu HaKadosha, the settlement of our holy land, Bichlal Ubinyan Yerushalayim, and the actual building up of Jerusalem in particular needs to be with midot shavot. And what does that mean, midot shavot? Equal measures. Say the sages, Ein ben David ba, the son of David, meaning the Messiah, son of David, won't come until all of the midot are equal. Everybody is using equal measures. When we're selling stuff in the marketplace and you're selling a kilo of strawberries, everybody's weight on the scale, you put the strawberries on one side and the kilo weight on the other side. We don't want somebody's kilo weight to weigh a little bit less. So you're getting less strawberries from one guy than from the other guy. Everybody has to be using the same kilo weight so that when everybody is transacting, nobody is stealing anything from anybody else. He says the Mashiach will not come until the nation of Israel treat each other with fairness. Nobody tries to take advantage of anybody else. Nobody's stealing from anybody else. And the Gaon of Vilna taught them also, Lo yebebeitcha efa ve'efa. This is the verse in the Torah. It says you shouldn't have in your house in Devarim, in Deuteronomy 25, you shouldn't have in your house different weights, right? A heavier kilo weight and a lighter kilo weight. You shouldn't have that, one for buying and one for selling, right? That's cheating. So he says that in your house, you should have not two different weights. And that's next to the verse that talks about you should have a full stone, Evan Shlema B'Tzedek. Should be full. And the Gaon of Vilna explained, Beveitcha, you shouldn't have in your house unequal weights. He's saying, buy it. Your house is Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. So in the land of Israel, in your marketplaces, you have to have equal weights and measures. This is the thing that is going to bring the Messiah. And related to Jerusalem, he says, you're going to have peace in your palace. You're going to have peace in your possessions, your material wealth. Okay. We think it's all about spiritual. No, it's not all about spiritual. I just want to finish here. So he says, so how do we do this? Everything has to be equal for everybody else. And we have to have a system where the courts and the justices treat everybody equally. Look, takir panim, they don't sort of give deference to the rich guy. The poor guy is taken care of, the orphan, we stand up. Everybody is treated equally before the law. Nobody can take advantage of anybody else, no matter who they are. This is the Torah principle. And not is it just the Torah principle, right? The founding fathers in America picked this idea up from here. They understood how important it was, equality before the law. This was an underlying fundamental principle because we say this is the fundamental underlying principle. How we behave down here in this world is going to indicate, do we accept the fact that there's a God or not? It's so easy. Take the grape in the supermarket. Nobody's looking, right? We have to be at a point where we're always feeling that the Almighty is looking down on us. He loves us, and we want to be connected to Him. And the way we connect to Him, if we have to treat each other. Each human being is Tselem Elokim, is in the image of the Almighty. If I'm trying to steal from a human being, it's like I'm stealing from the Almighty. I have to treat another human being the way I would treat God. They're at Tselem Elokim. You can't judge one person over the other. I can't say you're better, you're worse. And that's what Sinat Chinam was, right? Sinat Chinam is, oh, you don't keep Shabbat, you're bad. Oh, you don't do this, you're bad, right? Right? This is what's going on in America today. It's called Sinat Chinam. The left looks at the mistakes of the right and hates them for it and judges them. You're Untermenschen. You were deplorables. You were below the below. And what does the other side say? You people are not human beings. You're communists. You don't respect humanity. You don't respect the rights of the individual. Like God said, you're evil. Each side is pointing at each other saying you're evil because your mistakes are different than my mistakes. That's Sinat Chinam. And where does it all start? Respecting the rights of every individual. To be wrong. They can be wrong. I still have to respect them. They're Tselem Elokim. They're in the image of God. All right, let's wrap up. Let's get back to where we started with Chazon Yeshayahu. Isaiah tells us this in that first chapter of Isaiah. How does he end it? This is the last verses in that first chapter that we read this past Shabbat, verse 21 to 27. So he says, Echa hayta lezona, Kiryat Ne'amana. The city was a Ne'amana city. It was a city that was faithful, trustworthy. And it's become a zona, meaning harlot. Mishpat tzedek yelin ba ve'ata meratzchim. It used to be a righteous city, and now it's murderers. Sab'ech mahul b'mayim. What are the people doing? They're cutting the wine in the marketplace with water, diluting it so they can get an extra few shekels for the bottle of wine, taking advantage of the person. Sarayich sorim chavrei ganavim. Your rulers, they're thieves. You're hanging out with thieves. They're taking bribery. All they care about is the gifts that they can sock away, right? You see politicians, they wanna check Trump's tax returns, right? Right. Here's a billionaire that comes and takes no salary, and they want to check his tax returns. You want to check the tax returns of a public servant is paid $100,000 a year and ends up 3 years later with $12 million, right? I want to check those tax returns. So Isaiah's saying the same thing. That's all they're looking for. They're using their positions to benefit from it. Yatom lo yishpotu. They're not judging the orphan fairly. Beriv almana lo yavo alehem. They don't care about the widow. They're not arguing on her behalf. Take advantage of her. Overcharge her rent. Ashiva yaday alayich ve'atzrof kabor sagayich lasira kol b'dilayich. But don't worry about it. God will ultimately remove it. Well, one of two ways. Either we ourselves get it out of our system, or God will burn it out of our system. He'll get rid of it, right? And I will restore your judges as of old. We as Jews say this 3 times a day in our daily prayers. Please return, before we ask for the Mashiach, please return the judges as the days of old, where they're judging according to God's law and not taking bribery. And the counselors also. And then if we do that, then the city will be called a city of trustworthiness that believes in God and is acting according to God and is a Kiddush Hashem. Because when people see that you're not taking the grape in the supermarket because they're an almighty creator of the universe, and if you want that grape, you have to go and find the shop owner. Say, is it okay if I try a grape because I want to taste it before I buy it? And he says, okay, then you can take it. When somebody sees somebody preventing themselves from doing that, and they say, well, why don't you try one? You say, I can't take that. It's not mine to take. I have to ask permission. God says I have to do that. That's the Kiddush Hashem. That's who we're supposed to be. That's the Jewish people. And that's what the city's supposed to represent for everybody, so that everybody can come and feel that and experience that and take that experience back with them and change the world.